At that year's family meeting, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and words heavy with hidden meaning. I still remember the moment Eliza's laughter rang out behind me, sharp, cold, almost triumphant, while John leaned back in his chair, his eyes sliding over me before settling on the worn shoulders of my old sweater. "She can't even afford to fix her car, but she still thinks she has a say here," John remarked, half joking, half serious, prompting everyone to turn and look at me, waiting for a reaction. They were always like that. Every glance, every half-smile branded me as Samathan, the poorest niece in the Bennett family. In their eyes, I was the only one with nothing to be proud of. No luxury apartment, no shiny new car, none of those endless champagne parties in penthouses they love to flaunt online. But sometimes, the person everyone looks down on is the one holding all the keys, and when the truth finally comes out, who really controls the fate of this family? If you've ever been judged just because of how you look, share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story might just make you question everything you thought you knew about real value. The Bennett family has always been the picture-perfect model everyone wanted to emulate, at least on the surface. They own an old, stately mansion on the northern outskirts of the city, where rows of maple trees blaze red every fall, and ivy-covered walls seem to guard every secret, every memory of 3 generations. Outwardly, it's one big happy family. Glitzy reunions, smiling faces on social media, everything carefully staged. But only those on the inside, those sensitive enough or sharp enough, can see the cracks growing deeper beneath the glossy veneer of perfection. I was born here, grew up among family portraits and long dinners where children only spoke when spoken to, and the adults always talked about 2 things: reputation and money. Of course, your standing in the family was measured by the achievements you could parade in front of others. At the top was Uncle Mike, the man with prematurely gray hair, a dazzling gold ring on his finger, and the confident smile of someone who controlled everything. As chairman of the family investment fund, Uncle Mike didn't just hold the keys to the safe, he made all the big decisions for the Bennetts, from dividend splits to multi-million-dollar bets on real estate and green tech. No one in the family dared cross him, unless you wanted to be the next topic of gossip at the following party. Jason and Eliza, the siblings from my eldest uncle's branch, embodied everything glamorous a Bennett could possess. They lived in upscale condos, drove gleaming luxury cars, and never missed any social event bearing the Bennett family logo. Whenever I showed up, Eliza would give my old shoes a discreet once-over and shake her head with a smile, as if tallying how far behind I'd fallen from the family's standards. Jason loved to talk loudly about his latest multi-million-dollar project, though most of it came from his parents' money. For them, success had to be flashy. Front page of a magazine, or at the very least, a viral video about the rich and young. Out of everyone in the family, there was only one person who ever looked at me with genuine warmth. No labels, no judgment, never measuring my worth by what I wore or drove. That person was my grandmother Elizabeth. She was the spiritual pillar of our family, the old soul of the mansion, the one who set down the unspoken laws of honesty and perseverance. Remember, as a child, sneaking into her library and listening to stories about her early immigrant days. How every dollar was saved, invested, worked for patiently, and never spent in a rush, just to gain recognition. Grandma always told me, "True wealth, Samathan, isn't in what you show others. It's in what you know how to hold on to." Beneath her snowy white hair, she'd pull me close and give me the kind of confidence that living simply wasn't poverty, it was a power that discovered. Linda, my older sister, was one of the few in the younger Bennett generation who didn't care for the constant silent battles or the obsession with being better than everyone else. She always quietly stood by me, not in a showy way, but never afraid to look like an outsider among people who valued personal success above all family ties. Linda had once been an outstanding sociology student, then chose to work for a nonprofit knitted sub. People often whispered that she could have done so much more if she weren't so nice. But to me, Linda was the only companion I could truly rely on, even if she too sometimes struggled between Grandma's traditional values and the pressure to show off like the rest of the family. Every year, our family hosted a big meeting at the mansion, the setting for all major decisions, from how to invest our inheritance to debate over shared property, especially the fate of the old mansion itself. This year, things were even more tense because Uncle Mike announced his plan to restructure the assets, which in reality meant selling the mansion to invest in a new luxury real estate project. For Mike, everything could be reduced to money. Even Grandma's house was just another item in the portfolio, ready to be sacrificed if the profit was big enough. But to me, that mansion was memory. It was where I learned to cherish lasting value. Every corner of the garden, every photo, every story Grandma left behind. When I spoke up to protest, Mike simply raised an eyebrow, looking at me as if I'd just suggested something utterly ridiculous. "Samson, you should think about the future. Don't let your emotions drive big decisions." Most others nodded along. A few forced a polite smile. Some shot me covert glances as if I were just clinging to the past. Grief in the family grew deeper. On one side were Mike, John, and most of the influential relatives eager to modernize the legacy, willing to trade anything for more profit and power. On the other side, really only Linda and I stood firm, believing some things simply couldn't be measured in dollars. But in those symbolic family votes, my opinion was little more than a faint buzz outside the window. Everyone heard it, but no one cared. Sometimes, I'd overhear Jason and Eliza whispering at the end of the hallway, "Do you think Timothy actually wants to protect the mansion? Or is it just because she has nothing but those worn-out memories?" That question haunted me, because I knew exactly what I was up against. Not just Mike's plan, but an entire value system I'd never truly belonged to. Still, I understood that memories alone weren't enough to defend a legacy. My family might not see me, but I couldn't let them erase the traces of the person who believed in me most. Beneath the surface of glamorous parties and polite handshakes was a relentless battle between generations. Between those living for the past and those who only looked ahead, between real value and empty appearances. Everyone had their reasons for holding on or letting go. The difference was, not everyone dared to speak up, and not everyone had the patience to wait for the truth to finally come out. I was the one seen as an outsider, a failure, someone with nothing but stubbornness. But I knew there were things I had to protect, even if it meant standing alone against the entire Bennett family. If you've ever grown up in a family where everything is measured in material terms, you probably know what that feels like. The heavy silence beneath cheerful laughter, the glances from relatives that feel colder than any strangers, and the certainty that no matter how hard you try, you'll always be a side character, an outsider in your own home. That's the weight I carried through my youth, but it was also what made me realize I couldn't stand by and watch the most precious things in my life be sold out for someone else's empty ambitions. When I looked up, I saw Linda at the corner of the table. She gave me the slightest nod, but it was enough to tell me that even if the whole world turned its back, I still had one true ally. And I promised myself I would not let that house disappear, would not let Grandma's legacy become just another item on the project plans of people who only saw life in numbers, even if I had to face down an entire extended family ready to label me the failure. I would not back down. There were nights when I lay silently in my small room, listening to the city traffic far below, remembering every word Grandma whispered in my ear. When you feel most alone, that's when you must be most steadfast. Her advice was more than just a spiritual remedy. It became the map I carried every time I felt lost in the maze of difficult choices. After the family meeting, when everyone went back to their glittering lives, I once again found myself at the old wooden desk, legal documents about Grandma's estate spread out before me. No one knew that for years I'd quietly pored over every contract, every clause in the will, carefully noting voting rights and transfer conditions that most of my relatives never bothered to read. I started spending sleepless nights researching the family's property records, tracing every ink stain in Grandma's old files. Every line was a clue, drawing me closer to the truth. The mansion wasn't just a joint asset that could be sold off at will, as Uncle Mike claimed. It was protected by hidden provisions, especially one unique clause. If any family member could secure enough votes and the required financial backing, they had the right to propose a new development plan. This plan could overturn the vote to sell, allowing the house to be kept and developed according to the vision of someone with long-term goals. I realized Grandma had thought further ahead than anyone, but no one else had the patience to truly understand her, except me. Back in college, I was ridiculed for choosing to study financial management and investment instead of following trendy majors like tech or fashion. I worked at cafes, gradually learning to invest small amounts of my own savings. I lost everything once on a rash decision, but Grandma just gently patted my head and taught me how to analyze risk, how to always keep something aside for a rainy day. Those experiences built my habit of meticulous note-taking. Every expense had to be considered, every investment examined beyond the surface numbers. Each night, I returned to my tiny apartment, the same old Honda parked out on the balcony, the same cup of home-brewed coffee. Outwardly, everything seemed calm, but my mind was anything but. I knew that if I wanted to protect Grandma's legacy, I couldn't just use words or rely on feelings alone. I needed real power, the very kind my family always revered, ownership and voting rights, so I started planning to buy up shares in the companies and investment funds linked to the Bennetts. I reached out to an old college friend, now an investment lawyer, to help me set up LLCs as intermediaries, so no one would realize I was the one behind it all. Step by step, I pooled together my savings, sold off some minor stocks, and even took out bank loans to quietly buy up small shares that most of my relatives barely noticed. Shares that saw as nothing more than pocket money. At first, I targeted tiny stakes from old uncles who had retired or distant family members no longer attached to the mansion. They sold cheaply, believing these shares were worthless except for the annual dividends. I was patient, never rushing, collecting bit by bit. Each time I signed a new contract, it felt like I was picking up another brick to rebuild the wall of trust that had crumbled inside me. Alongside this, I spent hours with Linda, sharing every thought, every worry. Though she never said it outright, I knew she too felt a deep ache, thinking about the fate of our childhood home. Linda wasn't strong in finance, but she helped me see things from another angle. The mansion's value wasn't just material, it was a symbol, a driving force for the next generation to live better. Whenever I felt close to despair, lost in a sea of challenges, it was Linda who pulled me back to the reasons I started, to honor memories, gratitude, and a future I never got to fully share with Grandma. No one in the family knew that every time I quietly attended a shareholder meeting, I listened more intently than anyone. I noted every vote, every ballad, watched for those wanting to cash out, those weary of endless family disputes. I started building relationships with key people in the investment funds, subtly inquiring about opportunities to buy out shares, always condensing myself as a small investor, seeking stability, not someone competing for power. This approach let me slowly accumulate more than anyone suspected, and every move was planned like a long chess game. While the others threw parties and argued over the latest designer goods or luxury vacations, I was quietly building my own little empire, one share purchase agreement at a time, a discreet meeting with a banker, an email confirming new ownership transferred to an LLC under my control. There were nights I sat alone with a thick stack of files, both scared and excited, afraid of being found out, afraid I might not have the strength to see it through, but also thrilled by the thought that one day, I could finally defend what I believed in with real power. I didn't neglect my own learning either. I spent time reading up on inheritance law, real estate, and asset protection strategies for families. Every morning, looking in the mirror, I reminded myself, I'm not the poor Samathan they think I am. I'm the only one who truly understands what this mansion means. I knew if I kept waiting for my family's approval, I'd always be a faint shadow in their story. Only action, determination, and a solid strategy could give me a real chance to change my fate. In the mornings, I'd walk around the mansion while everyone else still slept, touch the cold brick walls and feel the heartbeat of the old house. I made a silent promise to Grandma, even if everyone turned their backs on me, no matter how rough the road ahead, I would see this through, to keep this legacy alive, not just for myself, but for anyone who still believed in the true value of being a Bennett. When the first rays of daylight shone through the window of my small apartment, I knew this journey would be long and lonely, but I wouldn't let myself give up. Every contract signed, every share quietly gathered, every secret move was a blow against the wall of prejudice my family had built around me for years, and I believed the day would come when that wall wouldn't be strong enough to keep me from stepping into the light, not as the poor one in the Bennett family, but as the only person brave enough to live by the values I hold dear. Not everyone knows just how painful it is to be pushed to the margins of your own family. In those days, I still showed up at every Bennett family meeting, large or small, always sitting in a corner, quieter than anyone else. I can't even remember how many times their eyes slid past me as if I was nothing more than a piece of furniture in that old mansion. The coldness wasn't in direct words, but seeped through every smirk, every meaningful glance exchanged between family members. John always chose the seat directly across from me, just close enough to make a comment that I was sure to hear, but no one else needed to notice. Think about it. If you can't even contribute to the fund, maybe you should let others handle the big stuff. Right, everyone? Eliza would giggle, leaning toward Jason, her gaze flicking over my plain shirt and coming to rest on my outdated phone next to a cup of tea. The comparisons never stopped, only grew more subtle. more biting. Jason's birthday party was a textbook example of exclusion. They held it in his penthouse, guests mostly old schoolmates or business partners, everyone dressed in designer brands, buzzing about million-dollar projects. I arrived right on time, bringing a bottle of wine I'd carefully searched before daring to buy. Even so, Eliza gave me a quick once-over and smiled, saying next time just come empty-handed, it'll save you the trouble of picking out budget wine. The atmosphere was lively, the music booming, but I felt like a ghost outside every conversation. Whenever I tried to offer an opinion, people would either ignore me or change the subject, as if my presence was just a technical stop on their way to more important things. And it didn't stop with the parties. At family meetings, Mike became more and more domineering, turning every discussion into his own personal lecture. He always had his books, his charts, always emphasizing the importance of optimizing assets and rationalizing capital. When I protested the idea of selling the mansion, Mike would just give a slight smile, the smile of a seasoned businessman humoring a naive child. Samathon, sometimes you need to understand that emotions don't feed a family. Look at yourself. Besides memories and a little nostalgia, do you have anything strong enough to argue with the numbers? Those words cut deep, but I simply smiled, quietly storing away every word, every judgmental look, reminding myself to be even more patient. Even my own mother, the one who should have been by my side during the hardest moments, began to waver when she saw me stubbornly standing alone against the whole family. One day, she visited my tiny apartment, looking around the cramped kitchen, the sink full of unwashed dishes, because I'd just come home from a meeting. She hesitated, then took my hand, her voice gentle as if afraid to hurt me. Honey, maybe you should reconsider. Sometimes knowing your place is also a smart way to live. All we want is for you to have peace. Don't make yourself suffer like this. That advice, however well-intentioned, only made me feel even more isolated. To everyone else, I was the embodiment of failure, of wrong choices. They all thought if I could be more like Eliza or Jason, with a shining career and a luxury home, I'd be easier to accept. No one noticed that I was still driving the old Honda, still renting a modest apartment in a neighborhood nobody could find on a map, still wearing the simple clothes my mother once mended when we had nothing. Every time I went back to the mansion, the housekeeper greeted me kindly but couldn't hide a hint of pity rather than proud of. Jason would sometimes throw out a jab in front of guests. Samathing's like a rare wood in this family, so old and out of place nobody knows what to do with her. The table would erupt in laughter, and then the topic would shift to new investments, European vacations, or the latest startup win. I just sat there, looking at all those familiar faces, and couldn't find a single place for my feeling. Many times I asked myself if I was wrong to keep holding on to something everyone else had long since let go. Most of the younger generation of the Bennetts only looked forward to whatever was shiny and enticing. They didn't care about Grandma's mansion, never felt any pang when thinking of old photographs or the keepsakes I'd tried to preserve. For them, a successful business deal mattered far more than the spiritual legacy I was trying so hard to protect. That isolation gradually numbed me, turning all my efforts into the butt of jokes whispered behind my back. But deep down, I knew that if I gave up, it wouldn't just be the house that was lost. It would bury Grandma's faith in me as well. The more I was excluded, the more determined I became, quietly gathering strength for the day of reckoning. I knew I didn't have many allies, apart from Linda, who always supported me silently. Everything else was a challenge I simply had to face alone. Sometimes I imagined Grandma sitting by the mansion window, looking at me with that gentle gaze, reminding me, your courage isn't measured by how many people stand with you, but by whether you're willing to go all the way for what you believe is right. Family members grew colder and more distant. Sometimes they'd hold meetings without telling me, or send last-minute notifications with the excuse, we didn't want to bother Samson since she's busy earning money to fix her car. Still, I'd show up, listening to every veiled remark about those who don't know how to strive, witnessing nod after nod agreeing to sell the mansion for new investment capital. They never realized it was those very looks and words that became my biggest motivation, not to give up, but to quietly keep buying up every tiny voting right I could. Returning to my humble apartment at night, I'd look in the mirror and see someone older than her years, but with an unwavering resolve in her eyes. Sometimes I thought my endurance had reached its limit. I just wanted to break down and cry, to let go of everything. But every time Linda sent a message checking in, or my mother sighed unintentionally during our conversations, I remembered Grandma's words. Don't expect anyone to see your worth if you don't believe in yourself first. I knew the road ahead would be filled with more trials, and the isolation would linger, but I wouldn't let myself give up, because if I didn't protect the last sacred things, then no one else would. And so, fueled by their rejection, I became even more steadfast in my plan, facing the Bennett family alone, quietly preparing for the day the truth would finally be heard, even knowing there was a towering wall of loneliness ahead. Being excluded was one thing, but being openly betrayed in front of a crowd, especially among people who call each other family, was another kind of pain, one that cut straight to the bone. That day, the Bennett mansion was aglow with lights from early morning, luxury cars lined up outside the gate, and house staff scurried about preparing. This year's annual meeting was busier than ever, not only close and distant relatives but also financial advisors, lawyers, and stern-faced representatives in shiny black suits clutching thick stacks of documents. The air in the grand hall was heavy with anticipation and judgment, as if everyone knew today would be more than just another family meeting. I sat at the far end of the table, surrounded by hushed whispers and scrutinizing glances, feeling the tension build with every passing second. Mike, impeccably dressed in a black suit and a power red tie, slowly stood up, cleared his throat, and began his speech, just like he always did. He emphasized the state of the market, the promise of new investment opportunities, and made it clear that the family was at a pivotal crossroads that required unity and decisiveness. "We can't let personal emotions get in the way of our future," Mike declared, his gaze landing pointedly on me. Everyone nodded in agreement. A few even clapped, as if they'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. Then Mike placed a stack of documents on the table and announced the plan to sell the mansion, the very heart and soul of the Bennett lineage. It was no longer a proposal but a decision already arranged behind the scenes. The numbers were laid out in detail: market price, projected profits, the steps for transferring assets, guarantees for the investment. I glanced around, searching for a sympathetic look, but found only cold faces. Some people even sighed in relief, as if a burden had finally been lifted from their shoulders. I knew I needed to speak, but my throat felt tight. Before I could get a word out, John cut in, sneering. "What are you thinking, Save Them? People who don't meet the financial requirements should leave the big decisions to those who can." A low wave of laughter rippled around the table, mixed with whispers. "It's already settled. Everybody knows she has nothing." Eliza wasted no time piling on, flaunting her new luxury watch and casually mentioning that her apartment had just been upgraded, before turning to me. "If you're poor, that's your problem. You can't expect to have a say in everything like us rich folks." Suddenly the air grew thick, as if every gaze converged on me, the one being judged, the one put on display, as if my objection to selling the mansion was nothing but a ridiculous melodrama in a play where everyone already knew their lines. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady, and spoke about spiritual value, about memories, about the promise I'd made to Grandma, but every word was drowned out by indifferent laughter and pitying looks. "You still don't get it, Simathan," Mike interrupted, his tone now stripped of any false friendliness and hard with finality. "This is a business decision. Sentimentality doesn't keep anyone warm for life." The family's legal representative announced the board's latest decision. Since Simathan does not meet the new financial criteria, her voting rights will be temporarily transferred to those able to contribute capital. That decision landed like the final blow, erasing any chance I had to speak up. My name was removed from the list of estate managers, the reason recorded plainly in the minutes, insipping financial resources. My mother looked at me with concern. Linda silently wept, while most of the others just saw it as the natural outcome of competition, a simple fact of life. Shrank back at the end of the table, listening to everyone animatedly discuss their plans for the future, their vacations, the profits they would soon divide among themselves. The humiliation didn't come from any one person, but from the entire family's value system, where success was measured only by bank balances and personal reputation. John's words, Eliza's laughter, Mike's indifferent voice, all of it echoed in my head, over and over, suffocating every last glimmer of hope. No one cared how I felt seeing my name cut from the management list. No one asked if I was all right, watching everything I cherished about to be sold off like some worthless commodity. Jason popped open another bottle of wine, Eliza discussed her plans to buy a new car, and Mike kept manipulating decisions as if I'd never even existed. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost control over the mansion, I'd lost my place as a true member of the Bennett family, cast out so publicly. I quietly left the meeting room, walking between rows of cold chairs, hearing the laughter and chatter behind me as if no one had just been hurt. Linda ran after me, grabbed my hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "Are you okay?" That simple question nearly broke me, but I forced a smile, telling myself I couldn't fall apart. Linda hugged me tightly and whispered, "You know what? Even if everyone else turns their back, I still believe in you. Don't let them make you doubt yourself." I stepped outside into the night. Under the streetlights, the mansion looked like a lonely old fortress in a sea of darkness. I stood there for a long time, breathing in deep, letting the cold seep into my heart, reminding myself that what had just happened wasn't the end. It was a necessary wound, forcing me to realize exactly where I stood on this family map. My hand clenched the car keys, my legs trembling with anger, but inside me, a new fire was starting to blaze. Because I knew that when you've hit rock bottom, the only thing left to save yourself is your will and the plan you've been patiently building for years. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just walked straight to my car and drove back to my small apartment, where no one mocked me, no one stripped me of my rights. That night I sat alone in my dark kitchen, tears streaming down my face, but my mind was clearer than ever. I looked at the documents I'd gathered, the anonymous ownership contracts, the shares I'd quietly bought back year after year. They might think they'd gotten rid of me, but they had no idea how ready I was for the day I'd finally get to speak my truth. And I swore, with all my resolve, that this betrayal would not be the final chapter of my story. I would return, and when I did, nothing would ever be the same. I never imagined there would come a day when I'd feel so out of place within the very family I'd spent my life trying to hold together. In the days that followed that fateful meeting, it felt as though everything in my life was sliding down an endless cliff. I locked myself in my apartment, kept my phone out of reach, including my mother, who didn't know whether to pity me or her own choices. Each morning, I still walked around the small park near my home, just as I'd done for years, but there was no peace left in those steps. The shame and humiliation clung to me, as if I'd turned myself into a ghost in someone else's life. Every night I lay awake. There were no more investment talks, no more family dinners, no more forced laughter echoing through the mansion, just the tick of the clock and the sound of my own breathing in the silent dark. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at the old photograph of Grandma on my desk, her gentle face, her eyes always shining with determination, and suddenly I'd feel small, defeated, worn out. I wondered, if she were still alive, what would she tell me? Or would she simply hold me close and let me cry, like a child who didn't need to be strong in front of the world? There were nights when I sat alone, tears falling quietly, my heart heavy with the sense of being a loser, not just to the greed and selfishness of my family, but in my own battle to hold on to meaning. I started to doubt my own worth. Was I really just a dreamer clinging to things no one valued anymore? Was my family right to cast me aside, since I brought nothing but memories and the last shreds of conscience left in our name? Those questions spun endlessly in my mind, making me shrink further into myself, as if all the light in the world had gone out. I thought back to my childhood, planting rose bushes with Grandma at the start of summer, my little hands covered in dirt but always feeling safe and steady. She taught me patience, how you don't plant a seed for fruit tomorrow, but because you believe that someday it will thrive no matter how fierce the storms. I remembered caring for the backyard garden with her, listening to stories about her failures, about investments she nearly lost, about never letting anyone extinguish your faith, even when the world turns its back. Those memories no longer comforted me, but they made the pain sharper as I thought about the fate of the mansion, the only real home I'd ever known, now listed for sale like any other commodity, by people who shared her blood. Once I passed by the mansion, standing outside the gate looking at the old maple trees rustling in the wind, feeling hollow inside. The house still stood tall, the big windows still glinting with the last sunlight of the day, but I knew everything had changed. I was no longer the owner of any room there, no longer had a say in the fate of a single brick or keepsake. Those I once called uncle, aunt, brother, or sister now saw me as an inconvenient past, a chapter that needed closing. That sense of loss couldn't be measured in tears, nor fully expressed in words. Linda was the only one who never let go of me. She kept calling, leaving dozens of messages even when I didn't respond. Sometimes she would knock on my apartment door in the middle of the night, bringing a small box of pastries and a warm cup of tea, sitting quietly beside me without questions or advice, just sharing the space in silence. In those moments, I finally felt I still had somewhere to return to, no matter how small or fragile it seemed. Linda told me, "You don't have to be strong in front of me. You're allowed to be tired, to feel weak, but don't ever let anyone else decide your worth." Her words, gentle as they were, still couldn't chase away the darkness that had wrapped itself around my soul. I realized then how long I'd been running away. I stopped checking my investment accounts, stopped reading financial reports, didn't care about the stack of documents I'd spent years. Night after night, I drifted through the long hours, escaping from reality, feeling lost at sea with no shore in sight. Sometimes, I'd find myself dreaming of the old days, when the mansion was still home, when the laughter of children echoed through its vast halls, when I didn't have to doubt every hug, every promise from my family. That dream grew ever more distant, leaving a void so big that even a careless word could make me cry. The fear of being forgotten, the pain of betrayal, the anger when I thought of those who once called me sister, niece, or cousin, now seeing me as nothing more than an obstacle in their path to success. All of it blended into a heavy sadness that crushed my will. There were times I really wanted to pack, leave the city, and find somewhere no one had ever heard of the Bennett name. I wondered if I could live an entirely new life, start over, forget all those who had hurt me, including the stubborn part of myself that refused to let go all those years. But then, very late one night, I sat at my desk, yellow lamplight shining on Grandma's old photograph. I remembered the words she had emphasized more than any lesson about money. True value isn't about whether others can see it, it's about whether you dare to hold on to it, even when no one else stands with you. I asked myself if I had the courage to do that, or if I'd end up like the others, letting go the moment the storm began. That was when the phone rang. Linda called. This time I couldn't bring myself to ignore it. She asked, her voice full of worry, "Are you okay? Don't give up, Samathan. I know you're stronger than you think. You've survived worse than this." That simple sentence was like a tiny light flickering in the dark. I realized I wasn't completely alone, that there was still someone who truly believed in me, who stood by me, not for advantage, not for power, but simply because she was my sister. I hung up and sat in the darkness for a long time. Finally, I stood up and opened the closet, pulling out those dusty files. I wasn't ready to forgive everyone, not yet, and I still didn't know what I would do next, but I knew I couldn't give up, not for them, but for Grandma, for Linda, and for myself. And even if the light ahead seemed far away, I would keep moving forward, no matter how slowly, until I found the meaning in everything I'd once believed was worth holding on to. Sometimes, the biggest changes begin with the smallest details, a seemingly meaningless moment in a string of bleak days. That day, Linda stopped by my apartment on a rainy afternoon, carrying a bag of warm bread and a large, weathered folder. She sat down across from me, said nothing, and quietly placed the folder on the table before saying, "You should look at this again. Maybe you've missed something important." While I nibbled on some bread, just trying to feel like I was still a part of the world, Linda flipped through the papers, her gaze stopping at a stack labeled Elizabeth's Vision Trust. She asked me about the documents. I just shook my head, admitting that lately I'd avoided everything, too drained to even hope for anything more. Linda patiently read every line, then suddenly looked up, her voice trembling. "Samathan, do you realize this trust was transferred to your name 6 months ago, and the legal representative is you?" I stared at her in shock, digging through my memory, realizing that, back in the days when I was still filled with resolve, I'd planned to accumulate shares, gathering up small portions into a trust in Grandma's name, just in case things ever took a... All those silent preparations, which had seemed so pointless, turned out to be my final anchor when I hit bottom. The more Linda checked, the more she uncovered contracts for share purchases. All of them had been transferred to Elizabeth's Vision Trust, with no one listed as legal controller but me. Condo building. The message announced that a new owner would soon implement certain policy changes, and invited all major residents to a private meeting for further discussion. Jason thought it was a prank, or just another of Uncle Mike's investment schemes, never suspecting that behind the network of companies and LLCs stood me, the very person the family never considered a decision-maker. I can still remember the blend of anxiety and calm as I read the email confirming official ownership transfer, a substantial stake in the condo complex, plus shares in the Horizon Growth Partners investment fund, all now in my hands through anonymous companies and the trust named after my beloved grandmother. Sensing it was time to act, I scheduled a meeting with Grandma's lawyer, Mr. Martin, a man well past 60, silver-haired but with sharp, kind eyes. As I told him everything, Martin listened quietly, then just smiled. Elizabeth always believed you were the only one who truly understood what it means to preserve a legacy. He handed me a supplementary will I'd never seen before. In it, Grandma had left a hidden clause. If any grandchild accumulated enough shares and asset ownership to exceed a set threshold, that person had the right to propose a new development plan for the mansion, a plan the management board would have to reconsider from scratch, no matter what previous decisions had been made. I was stunned as I read those gentle yet resolute words. It turned out my quiet efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. Even when I thought I had failed, every contract, every step taken in the shadows was actually gathering strength for some future pivotal moment. That feeling was both overwhelming and freeing, like I'd been walking through darkness all along with Grandma quietly guiding me by the hand, even if I hadn't realized it. For the first time in months, Linda just encouraged me with words. She became my true right hand, actively helping me. She sat beside me as we reviewed every document, reached out to old contacts, and verified all the legal evidence of my voting rights. I wasn't alone anymore. By my side was the only person in the entire Bennett clan who had always believed that the true meaning of a home couldn't be measured by a bank balance. Linda helped me organize the documents, prepare the legal plan for the upcoming decisive meeting, the one where I'd face all those who had judged me, cast me aside, and thought they had already won. Throughout the preparation, I received a few unexpected messages from distant relatives I'd never been close to before. They asked about my health, reminisced about childhood memories in the mansion, and quietly offered their support, legal or otherwise, to back up the clauses Grandma had mentioned. It turned out there were still those who believed in tradition, just waiting for someone else to speak up first. Linda said, "We're not as alone as you think. Even in this family there are hearts that know what really matters." What I never expected was one afternoon when my mother came to find me, her eyes filled with tears. She said she had read all the emails and documents I'd sent before, and she apologized for ever advising me to give up. "I forgot that the strongest person isn't the one who earns the most, but the one who stands up for what they believe is right," she said. I hugged her, my heart aching and warm at the same time. The feeling of being forgiven, of being understood, even if it was late, became the push I needed to keep going. In the final days before the big family meeting, I felt like I was living in a dream, caught between fear of being excluded once again and a new hope blossoming as I realized I now truly had the power. I double-checked every legal document, recalculated every voting percentage, and prepared contracts, asset proofs, letters confirming ownership. Linda cheered me on every night, and my mother called to remind me, "Believe in yourself." I knew that this time, I was standing up not just for a contract or a mansion, but for all the goodness and simplicity Grandma had left behind. A foundation, a value, a belief that, even if you're the one your family casts out, you can still achieve something extraordinary if you hold on to your will and your loyalty. The night before the decision, I walked around the little park garden again, no longer cold but now overflowing with new energy. I silently thanked Grandma, thanked Linda, and thanked myself for all the days I refused to give up. Tomorrow I would return to the Bennett mansion not as the ridiculed, excluded Sambathan, but as the one holding the keys to the family's destiny. I was ready for whatever would come, no matter how fierce the storm, because this time I knew I was no longer alone. That morning I woke up earlier than usual. The city felt unusually still, the gentle sunlight streaming through the small window of the apartment I still called my own, reminding me that today would be a day I'd never forget. I dressed simply, in the same clothes that many in my family had once mocked as too plain, but this time, I didn't care about anyone's judgment. As I stood in front of the Bennett mansion, every old emotion surged back. Pain, anger, all the years of being looked down on, and the ache of missing Grandma so much it hurt. But unlike every other time, I didn't step inside as a stranger in my own home. I walked in as someone ready to reclaim everything that truly mattered. The meeting room was more crowded than usual. The air buzzed with urgency, and people whispered about the big changes that might happen today. Mike sat at the head of the table, his face cold and eyes full of control, flanked by lawyers, financial advisors, and representatives of the old Bennett power. John and Eliza hovered at a distance, looking slightly anxious, probably unsettled by recent rumors about a change in ownership at their luxury condo building. Linda sat beside me, giving my hand a gentle squeeze for strength. while my mother waited quietly at the end of the table, her eyes wet but hopeful. The meeting began as always. Mike droned on about economic benefits, the new resort project, optimal solutions for the whole family. He confidently declared that all decisions had been agreed upon, that selling the mansion was just a final formality. No one asked about me. No one mentioned my name. I stayed silent, watching, waiting for my members. Once again my name was missing, as if I'd never existed. John smirked. Eliza breathed a sigh of relief, and Mike looked around, ready to bid farewell to the house that had once been the soul of the family. Stood up, my voice ringing through the vast room, cutting across the smug murmurs. If I may, I'd like to add some information I think everyone should know before making a decision about this house. The whole room turned to look at me, surprised, uneasy, even a little irritated. Mike frowned. Samathan, I think you no longer have any standing to— Actually, I have a lot more standing than anyone realizes. Slowly, I took out a stack of documents, placing on the table, one by one, the ownership contracts for the luxury apartments. The very contracts that made me, legally, the owner of the condo complex where Jason and Eliza lived. I pointed out each document, every legally verified transfer agreement, each LLCs, all subsidiaries of Elizabeth's Vision Trust, under my control. Jason's eyes widened, Eliza went pale, and the whispers died instantly. The air thickened as I continued, pulling out the records for my stake in Horizon Growth Partners, specifically 35% ownership and voting rights in the largest investment fund tied to the mansion. Mike began to lose his composure, his voice unsteady. What are you doing? This isn't the place for your antics. I looked him straight in the eye, for the first time completely unafraid. This isn't a joke. I've been quietly buying shares, accumulating assets, and transferring all controlling rights to Elizabeth's Vision Trust, exactly as outlined in Grandma's supplementary will. I have the authority to veto the sale of the mansion, and from now on, any major decisions about the Bennett legacy must have my approval. The room fell into stunned silence. The lawyer double-checked the documents and confirmed that everything I'd presented was legal, complete, and undeniable. Linda beamed with pride. My mother broke down in joyful tears. Some relatives who had always watched from the sidelines exchanged awkward glances, while Mike sat frozen, his former confidence gone for the first time. John tried to salvage the moment with a weak question. But how? How did— I answered in a steady, deep voice. Because I'm the only one who understood that the value of our family isn't in the numbers, but in honoring the past and protecting the true meaning Grandma worked so hard to create. I put forward my proposal. The mansion would not be sold, but instead become the headquarters of the Samathan Bennett Foundation, dedicated to affordable housing for the community and financial education for young people. From now on, all management decisions must be transparent, public, and focused on sustainable values rather than short-term personal gain. Anyone who wanted to cooperate for the community and legacy was welcome. Anyone interested only in their own benefit, I was ready to face head-on. The entire room erupted in mixed reactions. Some people cheered and applauded. Others were angry, stunned, or tried to curry favor with me for fear of losing their share. Mike finally had to admit defeat, and his eyes met mine. No longer just powerless, but, for the first time, there was a glimmer of respect and even a hint of regret. Linda came over and hugged me tightly, whispering, "You did it, Samathan. You restored the family's trust." I only smiled, feeling a lightness I had never known before. I looked around the room and realized that every gaze, whether still confused, skeptical, or newly admiring, could never turn away from me again. Today, I was no longer the one they called the poor one in the family. I was the person who dared to stand up, turn the tables, transform pain into power, and make memories into a new reality. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more people but I was ready. For the first time in years, I truly felt free, truly myself, among those who had once labeled me a failure. Before leaving the meeting room, I turned back to look at Grandma Elizabeth's portrait on the wall. I whispered in my heart, "I did it, Grandma, and I promise I'll never let go of what you taught me." The entire Bennett family was forced to finally recognize my true place and value, the very person they had once so easily excluded from the family's fate. But from now on, everything would change, and I would be the one holding the keys to that change. After that fateful meeting, it felt as if a new chapter had opened for the Bennett family. The next day, the mansion was no longer a topic for bargaining, gossip, or threats. It became a place for honest conversations to begin. I returned to my little apartment in the golden afternoon light, feeling lighter, as if I'd finally taken off the heavy armor I'd worn for years to protect myself from judgment and scorn. The old wounds were still there inside me, but they were replaced by a new peace. The peace of someone who has survived a great storm and kept her true self intact. In the days that followed, no one in the Bennett family dared mention selling the mansion again. Mike, who had held power for so many years, gradually changed the way he treated me. Instead of sizing me up with suspicion, he began to listen when I spoke about new community projects. John and Eliza no longer made cutting remarks. Instead, they were reserved, even embarrassed when they saw me at board meetings. They knew now they didn't just live in a comfortable condo, but in a place owned by the person they'd once called the poor one. Other family members, who'd never bothered with me before, started sending emails, messages, even offering to collaborate or contribute to the Samathane Foundation. I never turned away anyone who genuinely wanted to do something meaningful, but I also never forgot those who had once treated me as an outsider. I officially announced that the Bennett Mansion would become the headquarters of the foundation, a place for free financial education classes for local youth and affordable housing projects for families in need. Linda, my endlessly patient sister, now became my strongest partner in all community work. My mother often came to the mansion in the afternoons, sitting in the little garden sipping tea, telling stories to the children about days gone by. Memories, I believe, are the secret strength that will keep this house alive forever. Still lived simply. The old Honda, my small apartment, my thrifty and quiet habits. People often asked why I didn't move into the mansion or buy a new car to match my new role. I just smiled, because I understood that true value doesn't lie in the glamorous surface the world worships. I'm proud to still live by what Grandma taught me. The greatest wealth is being yourself, living true to your heart and using what you have to create good for others. Sometimes, I ran into relatives who had once been cold or distant. Some tried to get close to me again, but I no longer felt the need to prove myself to anyone. I also learned to forgive. Not to forget what they'd done, but to set myself free from the weight of resentment. Now, each day, I wake up with a light spirit, no longer feeling trapped between the past and other people's expectations.